Gymnastics asks something almost unreasonable of the human body. It asks a person to spin through the air at speed, to trust a springboard, a bar, a mat, a coach, a system built entirely on the premise that the body can be pushed further, always further, and still land safely on the other side. Sometimes it can't. The sport has produced moments of genuine beauty, the kind that stay with you for years. But it's also produced moments of catastrophic failure, where the line between a perfect routine and a permanent catastrophe was a fraction of a second, a slipped foot, a missed rotation, or something far more insidious. A culture that told young athletes their pain didn't matter. These aren't freak accidents in the way that phrase is usually meant. Most of them had warning signs. Most of them had people nearby who saw something wrong and said nothing, or said something and were ignored. That's what makes them so hard to sit with. Not just the tragedy itself, but the distance between what happened and what could have happened differently. Here are 5 of the most terrifying gymnastic deaths. Elena Mukhina. It was July 3rd, 1980, a training facility outside Moscow, 2 weeks before the opening of the Summer Olympics on Soviet soil. Elena Mukhina, the 1978 World All-Around Champion, was working through a floor exercise pass that she had told her coaches, more than once, was going to kill her. She was 20 years old. Mukhina had been born in Moscow in 1960 and raised by her grandmother after losing both parents young. She came up through the CSKA Moscow Sports Club, largely unnoticed until she began working with men's coach Mikhail Klimenko in the mid-1970s. Klimenko hadn't coached girls before, but he recognized something in her: exceptional coordination, fearlessness, and a deep desire to perform difficult skills. He pushed those qualities hard, sometimes past their limits. By 1978, Mukhina was the best female gymnast in the world. At the World Championships in Strasbourg, France, she beat Olympic champions Nadia Comaneci and Nelly Kim to take the all-around title. She was 17. The gymnastics world watched and assumed they were seeing the beginning of a long, dominant career. What they were actually watching was the peak. In 1979, Klimenko wanted her to add the Thomas salto to her floor routine. The skill had been developed by American men's gymnast Kurt Thomas, and it was one of the most technically unforgiving elements in the sport. A backward double somersault with 1.5 twists, landing forward into a roll. The margin for error was almost nothing. Too little rotation and the gymnast lands on her chin. Too much and she lands on the back of her skull. Mukhina knew this. She said so repeatedly. In a 1991 documentary, she recalled telling Klimenko directly, "I have said more than once that I would break my neck doing that element." He told her that people like her don't break their necks. By late 1979, things had gotten worse. She broke her leg during training, and the Soviet medical system, under enormous pressure to have their champion ready for the Moscow Olympics, rushed her recovery. Her cast was removed before the fracture had fully healed. She was put back in the gym. She was given diuretics to lose the weight she'd gained during her time off. Her body was not ready, and she knew it. She reportedly told doctors she wasn't healed. They sent her to train anyway. At the pre-Olympic camp at the Minsk Palace of Sport, Mukhina was exhausted, physically compromised, and still being required to practice the Thomas salto. On July 3, 1980, Klimenko had already left the facility, having traveled to Moscow to report to Soviet officials that Mukhina had mastered the element. Back at the training hall, an unnamed coach reportedly insisted she perform the full floor routine anyway. She under-rotated the Thomas salto. She landed on her chin. The impact fractured 3 vertebrae in her cervical spine and severed her spinal cord. She was left quadriplegic at 20 years old, 2 weeks before the Olympics she had spent years preparing for. Her first thought, she later said, was relief. "Thank God," she recalled thinking, "I won't be going to the Olympics." The Soviet state initially obscured what had happened, releasing conflicting reports about the nature of her injury. It wasn't until October 1981, more than a year later, that a state newspaper confirmed she had been paralyzed performing the Thomas salto. Mukhina lived the next 26 years in Moscow, dependent on full-time care. She gave occasional interviews in which she spoke with measured clarity about what the Soviet gymnastics system had done to her. She called Klemenko a victim of the same system. The real failure, she said, was collective. Everyone around her had seen she wasn't ready, and everyone had kept quiet. The Thomas Salto was removed from women's gymnastics entirely in the years following her accident. Elena Mukhina died on December 22, 2006, in Moscow, aged 46, from heart failure brought on by the quadriplegia she had lived with for more than 2 decades. Jalissa Gomez. It was May 5, 1988, a competition venue in Tokyo, Japan. Warm-ups were underway for the vault finals at the World Sports Fair. Jalissa Gomez, 15 years old and ranked 13th in the United States, was practicing a Yurchenko vault, a skill her coaches knew she hadn't mastered. Several people had noticed. Her former coach, Bela Karolyi, had seen it. Past teammates had seen it. Her current coach, Al Fong, had seen it. In the months leading up to Tokyo, Gomez had struggled with the vault consistently, sometimes missing her feet on the springboard entirely during practice runs. A former teammate, Chell Stack, later said plainly, "You could tell it was not a safe vault for her to be doing. Someone along the way should have stopped her." Nobody stopped her. Gomez had grown up in San Antonio, Texas, born in 1972 to a family that had worked its way up from migrant farm labor. Her parents, Otilia and Ramiro, sacrificed significantly to give their daughter access to elite coaching. At 10 years old, the family relocated to Houston so Jalissa could train with Karolyi. She trained alongside 1984 Olympic champion Mary Lou Retton. By 1986, she had placed 4th in the all-around at the junior division of the U.S. Championships and earned a place on the national team. By 1987, she was competing internationally, and she was genuinely considered a contender for the 1988 Olympic team. In early 1988, frustrated with Karolyi's training methods, she moved to Al Fong's Great American Gymnastics Express in Blue Springs, Missouri. The Tokyo competition was her first under Fong's coaching. The Yurchenko vault requires a gymnast to run at the springboard, hit a round-off entry onto it, and launch backward over the vaulting apparatus. The skill demands precise footwork and a clean, powerful takeoff. Gomez had been attempting it without the consistency it required, but her coaches believed the difficulty value was necessary for competitive scores, so the attempts continued. During warm-ups, her foot slipped off the springboard. She went headfirst into the vaulting horse at full speed. The impact broke her neck and left her paralyzed from the neck down. She was placed on a respirator and hospitalized in Tokyo. Then, a second catastrophe unfolded inside the hospital. While doctors performed a tracheotomy, the oxygen line to her ventilator became disconnected. The problem wasn't discovered for 15 hours. By then, Jalissa Gomez had suffered cardiac arrest and fallen into a coma. The brain damage was severe and irreversible. Her mother, Otilia, later described the hours before that second crisis. Jalissa had been briefly conscious after the initial accident. The first thing she asked, her mother said, was whether she would walk again. She was optimistic. She asked to pray. She didn't yet know the full extent of what had happened to her. After the ventilator failure, she never regained consciousness. Her family brought her home to Houston and cared for her for 3 years. She remained in a coma, kept alive through medical support, while her family held on to the possibility that she might somehow return. She didn't. Jalissa Gomez died on August 8, 1991, in Houston, Texas. She was 18 years old. Her death was directly attributed to complications from the vault accident 3 years earlier. In the aftermath, the International Gymnastics Federation moved to address vaulting safety. U-shaped springboard mats, previously permitted only in practice, were approved for competition use in 1989. By 2001, the traditional vaulting horse had been replaced entirely by a wider, more stable vaulting table. The 2006 Code of Points made the safety mat mandatory for Yurchenko-style vaults, with an automatic score of 0 assigned to any athlete who attempted one without it. The changes came too late for Jalissa Gomez, but they came because of her. Christy Henrich. It was July 26, 1994. Research Medical Center, Kansas City, Missouri. Christy Henrich was 22 years old and she was gone. The cause was multiple organ failure. At her lowest point, she had weighed 47 pounds. 6 years earlier, she'd been one of the best gymnasts in the United States. Henrich was born on July 18, 1972, in Independence, Missouri. She trained under Al Fong at the Great American Gymnastics Express in Blue Springs, the same gym that had produced Jalissa Gomez. She was disciplined, technically gifted, and relentlessly competitive. By 1988, she had climbed to the edge of the Olympic team. At the 1988 U.S. Championships, she finished 4th in the all-around. The top 3 made the team. Henrich missed it by 0.1 on 18 points, a margin so thin it barely registered as a number, and yet stayed with her for the rest of her life. That year, at an international competition, a judge told her bluntly that she needed to lose weight if she wanted to make the Olympic team. It was a single comment from a single person, but it landed somewhere deep. The sport she competed inside had already been sending that message for years, just less directly. Elite gymnastics in that era was built around what journalists would later call pixies, small, prepubescent girls whose bodies were treated as something to be controlled rather than cared for. Coaches made weight comments. Judges rewarded a particular physical type. The culture didn't hide what it valued. Henrich absorbed all of it, and then she absorbed that judge's words on top of everything else. She started restricting her food. At first, no one around her noticed. She kept competing, placing second on the uneven bars at the 1990 U.S. National Championships. But what had begun as a deliberate attempt to meet a standard the sport had set was becoming something she couldn't direct or stop. The disorder had its own momentum now. By early 1991, her body could no longer hold up under the physical demands of elite training. She was asked to leave Gage. She retired from gymnastics in January of that year. She was 18 years old, and the sport that had shaped her entire adolescence had spent several of those years delivering a message that her body, as it was, wasn't acceptable. What followed was a long deterioration. There were hospitalizations, brief recoveries, and stretches where the people around her allowed themselves to believe she might come back from it. She didn't. Her organs failed one by one, under the sustained weight of severe anorexia and bulimia. She died at Research Medical Center on July 26, 1994. Her death moved through the gymnastics world and out the other side. Other gymnasts, some of them well-known, came forward publicly to describe their own experiences with disordered eating. Kathy Rigby and Kathy Johnson were among those who acknowledged what they had been through. Television networks that covered gymnastics dropped the practice of listing athletes' body weights in on-screen captions. Educational programs on nutrition were introduced at the national and international levels. Those were real changes. But the culture that produced Henrich's story didn't end with her death. It adjusted. The comments became subtler. The pressure found different channels. What the sport confronted in the years after 1994 was a symptom, not the whole condition. What remained unchanged was the outline of what had happened to her. A gymnast who missed the 1988 Olympic team by a fraction, was told by a judge to lose weight, took that instruction seriously, and spent the next 6 years paying for it with her body. She had been asking the sport to see her as a person, and the sport had kept seeing her as a number on a scale. She was 22 years old when her organs finally gave out. It was November 8, 2019, a Friday afternoon at New Era Gymnastics in Hamden, Connecticut. Melanie Coleman, a 20-year-old student at Southern Connecticut State University, was working through a routine on the uneven bars. It was a regular practice session, the kind that happens hundreds of times a year at gyms across the country, with no competition pressure, no unusual circumstances, nothing to mark it as different from any other Friday. She fell from the bars and sustained a severe spinal cord injury. Coleman was transported to Yale New Haven Hospital in critical condition. 2 days later, on Sunday, November 10, 2019, she was gone. She had grown up in Milford, Connecticut, in a family where gymnastics wasn't a discovery, but an inheritance. Her mother had competed. Her two older sisters had competed. The sport was already woven into the household by the time Melanie was old enough to begin. She spent a decade training under Tom Alberti at New Era Gymnastics, the same facility where she was practicing the afternoon she was hurt. Alberti coached her from childhood through her years as a competitive junior, and he described her afterward in terms that had nothing to do with scores or rankings. To remember Melanie, he said, is to remember her joy and how happy the sport would make her, and how much she loved teaching the children and giving what she had to make others better. That last part mattered. Coleman wasn't just an athlete at New Era. She had come back as an instructor, working part-time with children ranging from 2 to 15 years old, while simultaneously pursuing a nursing degree at SCSU. She had reached the highest level of the USA Junior Olympics program. She was named a Women's Collegiate Gymnastics Association Scholastic All-American in 2019. Her university president, Joe Bertolino, noted that she had excelled in the classroom as well as the gym. Her head coach at SCSU, Jerry Nelson, called her an extraordinary young woman who touched every person around her. Her family's statement after her death described her as the light of a large household. They also noted that she had chosen organ donation, a decision that, in their words, allowed her spirit to continue through those who needed it most. Alberti called the fall a complete accident, and there's no reason to dispute that. Nothing in the session pointed toward what was about to happen. No skill attempt that pushed beyond her ability. No pattern of warning the way there had been in some of the earlier cases on this list. The bars were familiar. The routine was familiar. The afternoon was ordinary. And that, in its own way, is part of what makes this case sit differently. With Elena Mukhina, there were warnings that went ignored. With Jalissa Gomez, there were coaches who saw the problem and kept going anyway. With Christy Henrich, there was a system that actively shaped her destruction. Melanie Coleman's death doesn't fit that structure. It wasn't built toward. It just happened. In a place she had trained for 10 years, on equipment she knew, during a session that no one would have flagged as dangerous. The gymnastics community absorbed the news with genuine shock, and it prompted renewed conversation about safety protocols during collegiate training. But shock and conversation are often what follows these events, and they don't always lead somewhere permanent. What the sport was left with, after Coleman, was a reminder that the risk doesn't require a system failure or a warning ignored. Sometimes it's just the apparatus and the body, and a single moment where something goes wrong that can't be undone. Melanie Coleman was 20 years old. She had a degree to finish, a gym full of children who waited for her each week, and a family that called her their light. She was gone before the weekend was over. Naufal, Takdir al-Bari. It was September 2025. A sports facility in Penza, a city in western Russia, roughly 500 kilometers southeast of Moscow. 19-year-old Naufal Takdir al-Bari had been there since early in the month, training specifically for the 2025 Artistic Gymnastics World Championships, which were scheduled to take place in Jakarta the following October. On home soil, in front of his own country, he never made it back. Naufal was Indonesia's most promising young gymnast, and the federation had identified him as a realistic contender for the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. That wasn't projection based on hope. It was based on what he had already shown. He was 19, physically close to his peak, and the World Championships in Jakarta represented the kind of moment a career gets built around, a chance to compete at the highest level while the whole country is watching. During a training session in Penza, he was working on a bar exercise when he fell into the foam-filled pit below the apparatus. The landing was wrong. Foam pits exist precisely to absorb the impact of difficult attempts and give athletes a margin for error that hard mats can't provide. But the physics of a fall at the wrong angle, with the wrong force directed at the wrong part of the body, can exceed what foam is able to absorb. Naufal sustained a severe neck injury on impact. He was taken to intensive care immediately. The Indonesian Gymnastics Federation confirmed he was on life support. His family waited in Indonesia while officials began communicating with the Russian embassy about what support could be arranged and what options remained open. There weren't any. He spent 12 days in intensive care in Penza. On September 25, 2025, he was gone. He was 19 years old. Ita Yuliati, the chairperson of Indonesia's Gymnastics Federation, issued a statement following his death. "Indonesian gymnastics has lost one of its finest sons," she said. "This is a deep blow and sorrow for us." At the same time, the Federation was working with his family and the Russian embassy to arrange the repatriation of his remains home to Indonesia. The World Championships in Jakarta went ahead in October 2025. Naufal was not there. What makes his case particularly difficult to sit with is the gap between where he was going and where he ended up. The other cases on this list each carry their own specific weight. A system that ignored warnings, a coach who kept going, a culture that measured bodies instead of people, a fall on an ordinary afternoon. Naufal's story carries the weight of pure proximity. He was weeks away from the biggest competition of his career, in a country that had been preparing to watch him compete, training inside infrastructure built specifically to keep athletes safe. The foam pit was there. The safety equipment was in place. The session was routine. And none of it was enough to change what happened when his body met the pit at the wrong angle on that particular afternoon. Indonesia mourned him publicly and specifically, not as a cautionary symbol or a statistical entry, but as a person with a name and a trajectory that the gymnastics world had been watching. His federation mourned him, the broader gymnastics community, still absorbing years of difficult conversations about athlete safety and the physical cost of the sport at its highest levels, felt his death as something concrete and recent. Naufal Takdir al-Bari is the most recent name on a list that no sport wants to keep building. A list of young athletes who left for training and didn't come back. He was 19. He had a home championship waiting for him. He had the 2028 Olympics somewhere in the distance ahead. All of it ended in a single session, on an ordinary day in a city far from home. 5 names, 5 countries, 5 decades, 5 different ways the sport failed to bring someone home. The circumstances don't repeat, but the loss does. If these stories leave anything behind, it's this. The sport is worth watching, but the people inside it are worth protecting more. Subscribe if you want to keep watching stories like these.